Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here to the Minimum Foundation Program Task Force meeting, and we will begin with the roll call.
Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Mr. Alexander is present. Mr. Ward? Mr. Ward is not present. Dr. Bromley?
Here.
Dr. Bromley is present. Mr. Castile? Mr. Castile is not present. Mr. Claxton?
Here.
Mr. Claxton is present. Ms. Conway? Present. Conway is present. Dr. Corville has a proxy. Mr. Williams?
Here.
Mr. Williams is present. Mr. David?
Here.
Mr. David is present. Mr. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Davis is present. Mr. Irwin? Mr. Irwin is not present. Senator Fields?
Present.
Senator Fields is present. Ms. Groom?
Here.
Ms. Groom is present. Representative Harris? Representative Harris is not present. Mr. Hartley?
Here.
Mr. Hartley is present. Ms. Holloway?
Here.
Ms. Holloway is present. Ms. LaFleur?
Here.
Ms. LaFleur is present. Dr. Mills?
Here.
Dr. Mills is present. Ms. Monica? Ms. Monica is not present. Ms. Pluto has a proxy. Mr. Hayes?
Present.
Mr. Hayes is present. Dr. Cope? Here. Dr. Cope is present. Ms. Posey? Here. Ms. Posey is present. Dr. Procopio?
Here.
Dr. Procopio is present. Ms. Romer? Ms. Romer is not present. Ms. Shirai? Here. Ms. Shirai is present. Ms. Boucher?
Here.
Ms. Boucher is present. Dr. Baker? Dr. Baker is not present. Mr. Michaud? Michaud is not present. Ms. Whitney? Here. Ms. Whitney is present. We have a quorum.
And Ms. Romer just walked in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Before proceeding to the next item, I'd like to recognize Mr. Morris, Bessie member. Thank you for being here. We also have Ms. Boche with us from Bessie. Appreciate her being here. And Senator Fields, thank you for being here with us. And we have the governor's office represented, and that's Mr. Richard Hartley and the remainder of you. Thank you for being here. We have quite a bit to discuss. If you noticed your agenda today. Next item.
Consideration of a discussion regarding recommendations for the 2023-2024 Minimum Foundation Program funds.
Okay, we will begin before we have public comment cards. Please remember, public, if you are interested in speaking, to fill out a green card and turn it in. And we will begin, I think, Dr. Bromley with a presentation, and then of course we'll open it up for discussion. We have a few items we'd like to discuss.
Thank you, Chair Holloway. At this point, we're trying to look to Beth, and Beth, you can walk through the presentation that you had emailed out last week.
You can use your microphone down for the screen.
To just provide some background on it as well.
Okay, we'll start. If y'all can. Slides.
Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, thank you.
Everybody has
Sorry.
it.
Yes. If you want to just start, give it up. Okay. Just want to review today about the Minimum Foundation Program. So we'll start on slide 2. There we go. The Minimum Foundation Program is actually spoken to in the Constitution, and it provides that the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education shall have the responsibility of developing the formula, and it needs to contain 2 things. The formula is supposed to determine the cost of a minimum foundation program of education in our state, and it's also to equitably distribute the funds that the state provides. The calendar for the process, we are actually in the January-February time period, and in that time period the task force meets and considers the proposals put forth by the department, and then the responsibility of the task force is to make recommendations for Bessie to consider, and they'll do that at their March meeting in the early week of March on the 7th. Once Bessie makes that final decision, the department prepares the final resolution, which actually has the effect of law. And then that resolution, along with the estimated cost of the formula, is provided to the legislature no later than March 15th, so that they can then turn that into a legislative instrument sponsored by either the House Education Committee chairman or the Senate Education Committee chairman. And that becomes a bill, and it must work its way through the entire legislative process. Once adopted at the end of the legislative session, then the department takes that and implements it for the subsequent fiscal year. The formula, one thing important on slide 4 to remember is that once the formula is sent over to the legislature may only adopt that formula or reject that formula. They do not have the authority to change anything. They may send it back to Bessie with recommended suggestions for Bessie to consider changing it, but Bessie has sole authority on the actual creation of the contents of the formula itself. The current formula, as has been for a few years now, has 4 different levels, and each one of those levels has a specific purpose. Level 1 is what we refer to as the sort of the base and the piece of the formula that allocates the most money. And it actually first determines a projected cost of education in our state, and it measures the potential of the school systems to contribute to that cost, because our Constitution and laws say that the funding of education in Louisiana is actually a partnership between the state and the local school systems. 2/3 of the formula money is actually allocated in level 1, and we refer to that also as the equitable distribution of that formula, because once we determine the ability of the school systems to contribute dollars towards that cost, the state puts in the balance of that. But we do make sure that across all the school systems, the state always puts up 65% of that identified cost, and the school systems put up 35%. It doesn't mean that everybody gets an equivalent 65 or 35% from the locals. It means that it's based on your ability. So you may have a small school system that actually gets a lot more from the state than what we call wealthier school system, or those with more ability through their local taxes to support education in their communities. So if you look at the column where we distribute the funds in level 1, you'll see that some school systems get 50% or 60% from the state, whereas others may get some other different amount. We do have a minimum that every school system has to get at least 25%, because we do have a couple of systems that are considered to be ultra, who have wealth available to them, and the law the resolution says that they should all get a minimum of 25%. The way that we get to the calculation in level 1 is driven by students. When the formula was first developed back in the early 90s, it was moving from what was an expenditure-driven formula to a student-driven formula. And so we do that by counting the students on February 1st in the formula. We look at that, and we look at the, and those students that are counted for the February 1st count are counted as 1. But we also are able to recognize the special characteristics of the students, and we do that through what we call the weighted counts. And so these are the counts for students that are economically disadvantaged, of which that definition is very broad these days. We've tried to capture as much of the data available to identify students that may be in poverty. We share data with other state agencies to make sure that we capture that information. And we also recognize those students, those ELL students, to make sure that we have, capture all the students who may need a little extra, whose education may cost a little more. And that's what the weights are intended to do. There is also go to the next slide. There's also, in addition to the economic disadvantage weight, which is 22%, so that means that student who is counted as 1 meets the membership definition, which means they have to be enrolled and actively attending on the count date. They may also be identified as economically disadvantaged, and so they would count in the formula as 22% more than just one. So their weight is 1.22. We also look at the career and technical education weight, and that is actually driven by students. And that weight was intended to support the costs that are additional when it comes to having those career and technical education courses. We take a course count from our class collection, and we actually use a 6% weight on those courses to recognize those extra costs associated with those students enrolled in those classes. Then we look at students with disabilities. These are the students that are currently identified through it's actually the federal definition of what a disability is. It's 16 different categories. We track those through the data elements, and we count those students at 150% more because we know that there's costs associated with the education of those students. We want to recognize that in the formula. The gifted and talented here in Louisiana, we also have a weight for gifted and talented students at 60%. We also track that data and are able to count those students. The last weight is called the economy of scale weight, and this weight was designed to recognize those school systems who at the time were identified as being small, which means they had less than 7,500 students. It is a curvilinear weight, which means the closer you get to the 7,500, the smaller amount of weight you'll get for your students, and those who are the greatest distance, meaning the smallest districts, will actually get the largest weight, up to 20% more for their students. And that's meant to recognize the base costs that are there no matter what. Once you have all of the students counted, you multiply that student count and all of the weights, you come up with that total weighted student membership. And I know sometimes it's confusing to think about where that base per pupil comes in, but you actually count all the students first before you multiply that by the base per pupil. So the base per pupil is an amount that is set by Bessie and agreed to by the legislature as a starting point to calculate cost. And right now it's at $4,015 per student, and you take that weighted membership and you multiply that times that base per pupil to come up with that total cost. And that is the cost that is actually shared between the state and the local school systems. The way that we look at that is we actually measure the potential of the school systems to contribute to that cost. We look at the net assessed taxable value as being potential to raise ad valorem taxes, and we actually create a sales tax base where we take the sales tax revenue and divide that by the rates across the state to create a sales tax base, which is the potential to raise revenue. That actually ranks each of the school systems amongst each other, and that's what we use to actually determine those different percents that I explained that may be the result of that. Once we have we look at the potential of the school systems based on taxes, we actually look at in order to calculate the local share, we take what they can contribute versus that cost, and that balance is what the state puts up. Those proportions, as I stated before, might vary. They can vary anywhere from 85% in a very small district with little ability to raise taxes in their communities to some of the more urban districts who are able to contribute a lot to the cost of education in their districts because they have a bigger population and can levy more taxes. There was way back when, which is really the early 90s now, there were not a lot of school systems who had actually raised taxes to an extent that Bessie and the legislature felt was necessary for them to do their part towards education. So in order to encourage them to do more in their local communities, there was a level 2 provided. Level two's purpose was meant to be an incentive or a reward for the local school systems to raise those local taxes. So it was meant to look at their effort, which is different than their potential. It's meant to look at the actual taxes that they are able to raise and measure that against a target, which is it's an amount that's greater than the cost of education or their share of the cost of education. And when they exceed that amount, the state intended to give rewards for that excess effort, is what we call in level two. It has grown over the years, and we do have some situations now where everybody's kind of meeting that target. It's been interesting to watch that grow and the school systems make extra effort towards that level two reward over the years. Level three is actually contains some special allocations that were requested many years ago. They've been in the formula for a long time. All three allocations in there are driven by student counts. The first one is actually a continuation of some prior year pay raises. These were given back in the early 2000s, and the state needs to continue any of the pay raises given, and at that time the philosophy was that you would take the amounts that were given out and we would turn those into a per pupil amount so that the amount that was provided each year would be driven by the number of pupils. At that time, student counts were growing every year, and so this was a way to ensure that the dollars went out to the school systems when their number of pupils increased, with the, knowing that you would need more educators and more pay raise money to, attribute to an increased student count. The historical formula allocation has been called many things over the year. You might have heard it referred to as the hold harmless, but it's very old. It comes from the time where we switched from the expenditure-driven formula, which was back in 91-92 versus the 92-93 formula, and there were some school systems at the time who, according to this new way of doing math, were getting more than they would have under the new formula. And so it was a way to hold harmless and make sure they got those monies back quite a few years ago. The legislature, Bessie, agreed it was time to do away with some of those funds, so that all that remains there is a redistribution of some dollars to all the non-hold harmless school systems, and we do let those 10 or 11 hold harmless school systems retain some money for some insurance and things that they really needed to have continued. A lot of research was done at the time that this was phased out to make sure that everybody was made whole. The last thing is there's also an allocation for increasing mandated cost. It's $100 a student, and it was implemented in the mid-2000s at the time. Fuel and retirement were increasing dramatically, cost of transportation, and Bessie and the legislature agreed there should be some supplement for this. Level 4 is relatively new to the formula, and it actually contains all the specific programmatic allocations that Bessie and the legislature have decided over the last few years to provide funds for. It doesn't mean that everyone qualifies for this, other than the pay raises that are in there. It is more targeted to special situations. The first of these is the international teacher allocation, and these are the funds where at the time it was decided that because we want to recruit more teachers with international language to Louisiana, we needed to provide some sort of supplement to pay those salaries. And so the formula actually provides $21,000 towards the cost of the salaries for those teachers that come to teach in our country. $1,000 of that is taken by the school system who gets the allocation and actually helps support the visas that these teachers have to get. We work with CRT on that to make sure that those visas are paid for. There's also, with regards to these teachers, there's also some first year, second year, and third year stipends that are provided, meant to be like a recruitment stipend and help the new teachers get settled. And then if they stay through the second and third year, they get a stipend for that as well, for staying in our in our state and helping out in those communities, teaching those international languages. After that, we have something called the Career Development Fund. You might have heard about this. This is funding to support specific courses dealing with career training and certifications. We also, we give out those funds based on the number of courses that students are enrolled in. And we give an initial allocation, and then we do a reconciliation during the year. And it has grown on each year as the courses have increased. So it's nice to see those increases in the number of courses that the funding is able to support. It's well over $20 million right now. The supplemental course allocation is meant to support those courses that are beyond the normal class day. Dual enrollment can be paid for with these funds. It's actually given out on the number of 9th through 12th graders in all the schools and school systems across the state. It is managed by one of the program offices here in the department, and they work with those school systems to help and encourage them to spend these funds. High-cost services is a fund that helps students with the costs associated with students with disabilities with the highest expense associated with their services. It's actually done on an application basis. The application is released by the department. The school systems actually fill that out, send it back to us. We have approximately $12 million in the formula that goes towards these costs. We have expenses greater than that, so we do have to, the program people look at the applications to make sure that they're submitting these costs associated with these services, that they're valid. And then we're able to actually support the costs from all the applications up to that $12 million limit. But we do have costs in the last few years that are somewhat above that, so we do have to bring it down. The next one is the certificated and support worker pay raises. These are the pay raises that started out, the first one in 1920, the second one in 21-22, and this latest one in 22-23. They are in a separate, their own part of the spreadsheet for level 4, and you can see very clearly the number of staff that are reported, not just the certificated staff, but the support staff. And you can see the allocations very clearly that go to the school systems based on these counts. It does include the retirement contribution, and we monitor that on an annual basis, and it changes each year depending on what the retirement systems say are the retirement contribution rates. The last thing, the newest thing on the in level 4 is what we call the teacher mentor stipend allocation. This is new to 22-23, and it actually represents a stipend to those teachers that have signed up and have been certified to be a mentor to a teaching resident. We connect the data between the teaching residents and the mentors themselves, and once we validate that they actually have mentored, one or two teacher residents, they are awarded that $2,000. And that went out in the last few months for the first time. The residents, I will say, are also funded. We actually provide teacher residents funding through the same math as the pay raises. Right now, those teacher residents, again, are counted, validated that they are actually enrolled in an appropriate program, and they have been provided this year $3,300, or will be, if they teach all the way to the end of the year if it's in the spring, as a stipend based on their residency for the year. Lastly, we have a special section of the formula that actually supports allocations to all the other school systems in the state, and this includes the lab schools, the Type 2 charter schools, the Recovery School District, those schools managed by the RSD itself, plus the Type 5s that we actually have supervision over. We actually provide funding to OJJ, to NOCA, as well as LSMSA and Thrive. This year, we're doing it for the SSD as well, as they were brought into the formula by legislation. We already have in there the ULL Lab School. When they do open, we check with them annually to see if they're ready, and the latest word is they're not quite ready yet, but we do already have them in the formula in the year in which they do open. Each one of those schools has a little bit different funding. They're generally based on a per pupil amount, but they each have their own unique, very simplified allocation process. The audit adjustments, well, this is not audit, this is what we call the mid-year adjustments. So the one provision in the formula, because we start with February from the prior year and allocate the funds through the 12 months, it was recognized that perhaps there needed to be some sort of mid-year adjustment based on increases or decreases in the student counts. So we take October count of students, similar to what we do for the prior February, and we compare those. And for the increases or decreases in students, we make funding adjustments. We also do the same for February, where we compare the October count to the February count, and we make funding adjustments, and we net all those together. And we make those payment adjustments in March each year so that they can experience those payment adjustments for the final 4 months of the year and spread that out, whether it be an increase or a decrease. There's 4 months to actually adjust to the changes in the counts. I think that was kind of fast, I know, trying to keep it short and sweet, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
Anyone have a question? Yes. Ms. Moore?
On the level 4 funding, I'm just curious, how do things get added into the types of things that can be allocated to level 4? For example, the support for worker pay raises, has that always been there, or does someone decide to put that in level 4 as a fundable thing? Am I making sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, at the time that the 1920 pay raise was first discussed by this committee, it was determined that it would be more transparent and maybe an easier calculation to put it in level 4 rather than trying to do something in level 1. Level 1 is very sensitive to changes. It also, we want to maintain that equity calculation. So it was determined that the pay raise would start in level 4, and the other pay raises have followed. Bessie has determined that the same methodology should be followed, and so those have been in level 4 as well. But there can, as long as Bessie agrees to it, then it can go in level 4. Yeah, just about anything can go in level 4 at this point.
And last year, that was whenever we introduced the mentor teacher stipend into level 4, because we knew that we needed to expand the pool of mentors willing to provide support to first-year teachers.
Can I do a follow-up? I saw too in here, you have somewhere there's there was the $100 for like the cost of gas and things like that. How does that did that come through? It's been a while, right? I'd like to say it was before I was born, but that's not true, right? How does that get calculated?
Slide 16.
Thank you. How does that come about? Who decided that? Was that a Bessie decision? I know the legislature does the up or down, but where did that number come from?
At the time that it was developed, there was some statistics that we used to come up with an appropriate amount that had to be officially adopted by Bessie, and then at the legislature, I seem to recall the board members at the time went to the legislature, and it started out, I think, at maybe $90 or even $80-something, and then it was increased in a subsequent year, but there had been some dialogue about what was an appropriate amount.
Thank you.
From what I remember of that was the year we had somewhat of a large increase in the OJB benefits, the insurance premium, as well as the gas type. So they did a calculation on that and kind of came roughly to that figure, and it's been static at that rate since it was first done. But those were the two driving forces at that time behind that.
Anyone else? Question?
Sandy, if there's no more questions about Beth's presentation, I'll go ahead and put forward a motion so the substitute motions can begin.
Go right ahead.
Did you want my hand up?
Yeah, Kevin, do you have some handouts I gave you? I forget how many substitute motions we had last week. Yes,
Enough to
enough to remember that we had.
Yeah.
So just procedurally, remember that our task force here today advises Bessie, and ultimately Bessie makes decisions on what they want to send over to the legislature. The legislature then provides an up-down vote. The past, I believe last year, Shannon, help me if I'm incorrect, last year, when we sent something over, it came back with notes and we made some revisions and then we sent it back. So it's all a process, but today is just about the beginning of that process. And so,
To clarify that, because I've had this question, if it gets rejected, it has to come back to us. You can't just,
yeah.
that question.
And I believe that's what happened last year. Or else the year before.
And in both years.
Both years, okay. So on the first page, you just have an introduction. It talks about, in terms of what I'm recommending, it talks about how we are going to maintain everything that's presently in the MFP, and then focus on two areas. The first being employee pay. So on employee pay, just to call out, we know that in 2021, when we surveyed our systems, we had 2,520 teaching vacancies. I think because of salary increases last year, whether it was the $1,500 salary increase, as well as some various policy shifts, we were able to cut that number down. We believe that we need 1,203 teachers in this present school year. So the proposal that I'll make increases base pay for all certified teachers and support staff, while also providing a system of funding to target resources directly towards needs within local school systems. More about that later. The second part has to do with workforce development. So recognizing that the job market is shifting and that high schools have to be really responsive to those needs with an increased emphasis on career and technical education. So one of the most emerging programs throughout the country for career and technical education is the apprenticeship model. We have some of that moving in our state. Of course, we launched the Fast Forward Initiative in 2020 to break down barriers that would allow for more apprenticeships to happen. But recently, in some policy discussions that we've had, it has come to our attention that there is a desire for additional funding to be able to pursue apprenticeships. So along with employee pay, the second part has to do with workforce development, and whenever I mean that, I'm talking about funding apprenticeships in our high schools. So if you go to the back page, you see three particular recommendations that make up the whole of the recommendation that I'm making for you all today. Number one is to advance the $2,000 certificated and $1,000 support pay raise included in the governor's executive budget. So just to be clear, in the governor's budget, while there has been a number of 3,000 floated, the number that is in the budget is $2,000 for it across the board pay raise for teachers and a $1,000 for support. Now there is talk if additional dollars would be recognized, I believe that the intent would be for that to be raised to $3,000. So the proposal that I'm making on number one is to align to that number. On number two, I want to go ahead and ask for that additional $1,000 per teacher, but block grant this to systems so that individual school leaders could use that money based on the market needs within their own school system. So just as a for instance, if you were a school system with 100 teachers, you would get $100,000 plus the associated retirement benefits. And with that pool of money, that local system and governance board could make decisions on how they would like to use that money. And I have the areas where that could be used. So that will be critical shortage areas. That means teaching fields where you are need employees the most. Two, highly effective teachers, so those teachers that are the most highly effective, if you choose to use it there. 3, you could choose to use it for teachers working in schools that were considered the most high needs. We're defining that as schools with an 85% or greater economic disadvantage rate. And 4, being classroom teachers appointed to be teacher leaders. And so not every teacher wants to go and be an administrator, but many of them want to assume leadership responsibilities within the school, whether that's a mentor teacher, a teacher coach, something like that. So with this particular pot of money, it would be $1,000 per teacher in your system would go into a pool, and then that local system could choose how to allocate that money within these 4 areas. It could be a combination of these areas. It could be all in one area. But you, for instance, might decide that you need to pay your chemistry teachers an extra $5,000 to be able to recruit them. Or you may have a school that's particularly hard to staff, and you need to provide additional stipend for people at that particular school. So in terms of pay, it advances in alignment with the governor's executive budget, the 2,000, 1,000, and we go ahead and ask for with this the $1,000 per teacher that would go in a pool. So the effect of this is a $3,000 per teacher average increase, although within that 1,000, it could be directed in different areas as seen best by the local leader and their governance board. And then the third piece has to do with the apprenticeship model. So we would take $1.5 million and put that into the supplemental course allocation as the vehicle for delivery. We would fund up to the first basically 500 students. 250 of those could be at 2,500, and then 250 if they're in one of the federally declared rural systems, it would be 3,500, recognizing that rural systems sometimes face additional challenges in terms of transportation to and from areas that might be working for an apprenticeship. And so that would be 500 students annually just to introduce the concept of directly funding apprenticeships through supplemental course at a value of $1.5 million. So number 1, which has to do with the across-the-board raises, total cost $196.5 million. Number 2, total cost $49.1 million. Number 3, total cost $1.5 million.
Thank you, Dr. Bromley. Any questions? Yes.
Well, not necessarily a question, but I do want to say I appreciate what Dr. Bromley just said. My name is Torrance Williams, and I am the proxy for Dr. Corbeil. I work as the Director of Teacher Advancement for Apple, and I am a former teacher, instructional coach, principal in West Louisiana Parish, and I see what teachers are doing every single day around the state of Louisiana, and so I do want to say I think that this is something that is solid and would do the greatest benefit to teachers. I think when I think about some of the districts that I am seeing around the state and how they are truly struggling to support students, a lot of it does have to do with the financial situation. But what I do want to think about is, when we think about the finances of it, we can say that it's not that important to give teachers raises, but when we think about that ultimately affects students because we don't get teachers in those positions, right? Or we get people who are not necessarily qualified and require a great deal of support. And so I feel like this plan puts all of that into perspective, and we can kind of sort of kill more than one bird with a stone. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Brumley.
Would you like to second his motion?
So as a proxy, I cannot vote.
Oh, okay. So do we have a second for the motion for discussion purposes?
I just have a question.
Yes, second.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Bromley, can you explain a little bit apprenticeship? I'm trying to figure out how that fits into my system or rural system. I know that we have a meal. They don't allow our kids on the campus if they're under 18. So what options would we have? Give me some ideas of apprenticeship.
Well, so we have a few of those that have already been approved. I have a list of those that have already been approved by our board, and these were submitted by local school systems. So local school systems submitted these. Our board approved them as a graduation pathway. So mechanical engineering technology, welding, steam fitter, pipe fitter, nursing, electrician, and carpentry. Those are some of the apprenticeships that are already underway in the state. And these are ones that local educational agencies, local school systems submitted to our board and said, hey, we want to do these apprenticeships. Can we do them and allow this to count for the high school diploma? And so that junior and senior year, we talked a lot about that. There's some flexibility there. And these are some of the ones that have already been approved.
So we could submit our own apprenticeship and that would qualify for that, if we found somebody to work with us.
Yes, and it has to be approved through, I believe, the Workforce Council. And that's, But Superintendent Claxton, that is happening, across the state.
Well, and I look at it, we've got a CNA program already, and all the things we do, and I'm trying to see how, in my little area, what I can do with an apprenticeship. I mean, I'm pulling the strings here, thank you. So.
We have a hospital system, for instance, that has taken in a number of our students from a particular school system, and instead of going to their high school, they go to the hospital for junior and senior year, and we've subbed out the courses that they would have to take at the high school for courses for the apprenticeship in nursing. And so the hospital system said, we'll do better, we'll provide the training, and we'll employ them all at graduation.
Just asking a question.
If you don't mind, Mr. Hartley, we need a second on his motion. Dr. Bromley made a motion, I need a second. Also, need a second. Okay, second. Now we're going to move forward. Mr. Hartley.
I just want to reemphasize that if REC recognizes more dollars, the governor's intent is to put $1,000 to teachers, $500 for support to make a total raise of $3,000 and $1,500. And I think we all in this room know that since day one as a candidate, he's been pushing to raise teacher salary in Louisiana to the Southern Regional Education Board average. And we're almost right there at it with these particular pay raises. And so I know there's not enough money to do everything we want to do, but I think it's very, very important that we're really looking to pay raise equitably across the state. Thank you.
Chair Holloway, if I could follow up, because Mr. Hartley mentioned SREB, I want to just give the averages from 22. You may already have them, but 22 in Louisiana, 52,759, 52,759. SREB, 56,309. And so I think that's a difference of $3,550. What that doesn't include, however, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, is that doesn't include the impact of the $1,500 that was approved last year. So I do agree with Mr. Hartley, we're closing that gap. And if this proposal were passed, we certainly would get closer.
Any other discussions on Dr. Bromley's class? We do have someone that wants to amend the motion. Or is that a question? Question. Yes, I'll come to you.
Superintendent Bromley, you had said, you mentioned a high school that is working with the hospital now. Can you let us know who that is? Because through our dual enrollment task force conversations, through our workforce conversations of on that task force, it's our understanding that they cannot go in the place of business or on the property of the place of business until they are 18 years old for this to count. So, and it's also our understanding in these task force that when these conversations come up, that it's because there's a law through workforce somehow. So we'd like to know, so we can model who's actually doing it across the state, and maybe Superintendent Claxton can go back to his paper mill or to his nursing homes or to a local hospital in his area to say that someone is doing it and they want to replicate it, so they're not breaking the law.
Yeah, so what I can do is for each of the apprenticeships that have already been approved by the state board, I can send you the school system that submitted that, because they already have the permissions to do that within their local system, because they worked that out with the group that was doing the apprenticeship.
So within the MFP formula, if some can do this and some cannot, then we would have inequity across our state of all students having the opportunity. And so then, correct me if I'm wrong, there would be pots of money that certain school systems or charter schools could not access because of the workforce in their area will not allow it.
Well, the goal is that we would continue to cultivate these types of opportunities throughout the state. And there hasn't been direct funding through something like supplemental course allocation to be able to do that in the past. And so that's why we're trying to do this for the first time, to help cultivate these apprenticeships throughout the state.
But again, I go back to the question of if the company will not do this and allow this, then again, we will create inequities across our state once again with funding. So just to keep in mind that once again, especially I'm really concerned for our rural school systems in this aspect. So I would say I have to vote no on this because of inequities and not access for all kids. Sorry.
Are you referring to number 2 or 3?
For apprenticeships. We would love to have more funding in dual enrollment because all kids can have access to that as we move the dual enrollment task force forward, and also in career and tech. So we can afford the increase of materials and supplies, especially with our community college system for welding, metalsmithing, and also nursing programs.
Okay, something was presented here. I'm so happy you came aside, Mr. Garvey. I'd like to recognize you for being here, Bessie.
Thank you.
Do you want to make the comment that you recognize this?
I don't think I can.
You can't. I'll speak for you. Okay, he's made the comment that if you note on number 3, the rural per the federal REAP program would receive $3,500 per enrolled student, and non-rural would receive $2,500 per student.
Which is designed to address the inequity that you were just talking about. The rural areas having a more difficult time getting their students to these workplaces, and getting employers to participate, and so an extra $1,000 per student would be going to them.
And we appreciate that, Mr. Garvey. But again, at the end of the day, and we have superintendents in the room, we also have superintendents in the audience. From a school system, from a school board point of view, if everyone can have apprenticeships for our students, then we can support this. But if we cannot have this across the state, again, we're providing access for some and not all. But do appreciate about the rural school systems, Mr. Garvey, because you are on a lot of those task force with us, and you have listened to the concerns, especially from our rural school systems, that it does cost more, especially with travel and transportation. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Poe. Ms. Conway had I'm sorry, Ms. Conway's been waiting.
This is all right, great. And thank you for the presentation, and for everyone who is curious, I'm the parent representative. I've been around this space for a long time, but I have 2 children in East Baton Rouge Parish Schools, and so I'm lucky enough to be here just as a mom today. Couple of questions. The first being, number 2 is not a subset of number 1, right? This would be an additional 49 million or an additional 1,000, okay. And right now, number 2 is not in the executive budget.
That's right.
But we think it may be, okay. A couple of questions around number 2, which I'm really excited to see some differentiation. I think that's been needed for a long time. For the teachers in critical areas as determined by the WIC, many of those jobs, in addition to needing things like computer scientists, are also non-4-year degrees, like truck driving or nursing. I'm assuming even some of those CTE courses, teachers teaching some of those critical, more workforce-oriented courses or technical courses would be eligible for the stipends, and not just the sort of the higher end, whether that's accounting or computer science or some of the other 4-year degree required jobs that we're preparing students for. Do we know? I'm assuming that's a wide blanket as determined by the WIC, but I know a lot of high-demand areas are in technical, less than a 4-year degree required job openings.
Yeah, so the goal there was just to try to prompt WIC and local school systems to work together even more so than before around what the needs are within their local communities and within their local systems.
Hopefully it'll encompass both. Some of those technical courses are even more expensive, and it's even harder to lure a truck driver or a nurse back to a classroom to teach. So hopefully that might could help with some of those shortages that we're seeing in the labor market, but also in the classroom. The second question I had around number 2, stipends for teachers working in high-need schools. Are there some districts where that is most teachers in most schools? I'm assuming so. Okay. So in some places, we may see this sort of blanketed out based on what the school board decides in that area. Okay. I think that's all the questions that I had, but.
And the idea there, and you raise a good point, it could be like if you had 2 schools in your LEA and they were all above 85% economically disadvantaged, that particular system may decide, we'll just take this 1,000 and lay it out evenly. But a different system may say, we have one school over here that was really struggling to staff, and an extra $5,000 might help. So it would be the decision of the local leader and governance board.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Last question, just thinking about the levels that you walked through, Ms. Beth, would this be, if this was adopted, would this be part of level 4 permanent increases going forward, not a one-time raise?
It would be stipends.
Stipends, so
Yeah.
permanent or just one time like a bonus?
Well, it'd be given out as a stipend. If the school system decided to make it a pay raise, the allocation would be unique to each school system every year because we would be using different data. So they would have to take on that responsibility to manage their budget that they could pay it as a pay raise.
But it would be maintained in the.
Right,
Yeah,
it would be
yeah.
given every year.
Every year, perfect.
But they have responsibility for budgeting those funds.
How they want to do it annually. Perfect. Thank you so much.
So these stipends, we're trying to get some clarification in that number 1, 2, and 3 would be in level 4,
Yes,
all 3.
And that's reoccurring.
yes.
As long as it's in the
Yeah. It's not outside.
Yeah, and that's to the sponsors.
Waiting on Jack, Ms. Romer, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you. Again, I'm Caroline Romer. I am the Executive Director of Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. I don't think anyone would argue against pay raises for teachers. If you look at what's happening in states around us, we're still behind. So certainly, I don't think there should be a lot of arguing there other than maybe more, right? Love number 2, love the differentiated concept. As charter schools, we often argue for money going in that level 1 funding so we can differentiate and make decisions as close to our students and teachers as possible. So really appreciate seeing number 2 there. I have not spoken with our membership much about the apprenticeship. I certainly hear what Ms. Pope is saying. It seems like a pretty minimal number though, $1.5 million when you look at what we're spending. Maybe there's improvement there, but I certainly our organization supports that workforce development that needs to be done. I'm sorry that there's not a number 4, and I'd love to hear your philosophy on why there isn't a number 4 about level 1 funding in the 2.75%. Again, I mean, right now COLAs are averaging 3% increase. I asked my question about the level 3 funding around the TRSL, gas prices. We're seeing all of that right now. So while I can appreciate giving our teachers what they need and deserve, because we wouldn't be schools without them, we still have costs, whether that is insurance on our facilities, our transportation costs. So why isn't there a number 4? I'm not arguing for 2.75 yet, but I'd love to hear your thinking on that.
That's not in your sub-motion just yet.
Not yet.
No, I mean, I fully anticipated that would be a point of conversation here today. I mean, I knew that it would be. It's not included in the governor's executive budget. We have not recommended it the last couple of years. In fact, I think it was like 2014 or so the last time it was included. which is, unfortunate. I think one of the challenges now, and I had a conversation with someone yesterday, one of the challenges now, I think, in legislatively, with trying to get a 2.75 pass, and don't everyone jump at me whenever I say this, but people see the amount of COVID stimulus dollars that are still available. And it's slightly over half of the initial allocation. And I realize that can't all be used for operational. I get that. You don't have to prove that to me. I know it. But just the optics of it is that it does exist. And with it not being in the executive budget, I have to try to figure out what makes sense to try and move forward with. And so this is where this is ultimately where I landed.
Thank you. I have Ms. Boche.
Okay.
And I think it's just tagging on yours. Yes.
Okay, I just have a couple of questions. When you're looking at the differentiated compensation, are you looking at these 4 elements as being all inclusive? For example, you said something like if you had a chemistry teacher and you wanted to pay, because it was a high need area, an extra $5,000, I don't even see where that would fall in unless that chemistry teacher was highly effective. If we are looking at any type of a differentiated compensation, I think we have to expand a little bit potential reasons why we give it. It might differ from school system to school system.
So that, Superintendent Moshe, that would be in number 1, the critical areas that were
Or
determined.
by WIC, by the Workforce Investment Council, usually they deal with the CTE pretty much in Jumpstart pathways, unless you're going to say that chemistry is a course within some pathway.
Well, they're not approving pathways. There would be here in this particular model, working alongside local systems to determine what are the specific employment needs that are needed. It might be a chemistry teacher. It might be a kindergarten teacher. I don't know. But those critical areas would be determined there. So I assume it would be a chemistry teacher. So that would be included in that first bucket.
Well, I hate to put a whole lot of red tape in this. I mean, I think if we're going to do something like this, and that's where the flexibility comes in that Ms. Romer was talking about in terms of an increase in the per pupil, you're going to have individual school systems with individual needs. And in many cases, when you differentiate, I think we need to consider some expanded categories. And if we go this direction, just to comment on that. The funding for the apprenticeships, so you're talking about full apprenticeships or pre-apprenticeships or both?
That would be registered through registered apprenticeship providers, so it could be one or the other.
So it could be the pre-apprenticeship programs as well as the full, because I know the full apprenticeship is going to narrow the number of students because it's a much more rigorous endeavor than the pre-apprenticeship program. So this could apply to both, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to clear that up. Now, as the MFP, the dual enrollment task force that was alluded to earlier, done a tremendous work over the past couple of years. So in increasing dual enrollment classes, and I know legislation has also been passed with that, with the emphasis on dual enrollment. And through that task force, which is chaired by, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, along with Mike over here, co-chaired, the ask was going to be for $25 million for dual enrollment classes. The cost of these classes is exponentially increasing. The community colleges and tech, it's more than 3 times. They are going up, even in my area, on tuition and supplies and such. And that is CTE classes as well as your general ed classes. So I am not sure, when we talked about it at the MFP Task Force, there was a question as, should that be requested to go through the MFP funding in this level or go through the actual college funding? And it was up in the air, and there was supposed to be discussions with the governor's office. I don't know about putting Richard on the spot here, but I don't think I see it in the current executive budget.
No, when the budget was being discussed, MFP and higher ed, they had not finalized the plan, and they couldn't, put it in the budget until the plans were finalized. But there's still possibility of some money out there if they present a completed plan to get that 25 million, but it's not in the MFP or IRA right now.
And I realize with
My
the,
understanding of that, Superintendent Bochet,
Yeah.
is that it was part of the Board of Regents request that they made in terms of the executive budget. They made a $25 million request. And I just learned last night, I believe, that I don't think it was included in the executive budget after all the negotiations were. Now, I think that it still could be
Yes.
somehow. But in working with Kim Hunter-Reid over the last couple of months, there was a $25 million request in the Regents executive budget request. But I just learned last night that it wasn't included in the final executive budget.
and understand we can't necessarily make a total decision on that today with this, but and we have time between now and the actual MFP, the Bessie meeting, to look at the MFP. But, and I do understand that we need to get our foot in the door maybe with some of these apprenticeship programs, but the larger issue for the greater majority of our kids statewide is this emphasis that we're all now putting on dual enrollment, whether they be in CTE courses or in general ed courses. And for us to be able to fund these opportunities for our students definitely on an equity basis, we need to be able to provide those funds. So whether it's coming through the MFP or whether it will come through the Board of Regents budget in higher ed, I think we all need to kind of make sure it's coming from someplace so that we can fund those opportunities, opportunities for our students. And then lastly, with Ms. Romer's 2.75, that $100 on, I know, you're looking like that, on that insurance, and yeah, so I remember when all that was done, one of those quick things, let's do something to offset the increase in those insurance premiums and the rise in the gas and such, and it was put in there, and boom, and that was, I don't know, 8 years ago, I can't even remember the year it was done. But, and I know the perception out there that we have all this federal money that's coming in, but we are, as school systems, are very leery about expenditures that would be recurring to put into those federal funding, into those grants. Because whether you increase your literacy coaches or you do something that entails paying people to do certain things, what do you do when this goes away in September of 2024? What are we in now? February, it's a year and a half from now, it's gone. So next year, the next school year, it's going to be finished at the end of the next school year. So you can't really put a lot of recurring expenditures or utilize those funds for that. So there has to be some recognition by Bessie and by the legislature that that money is being used to shore up certain areas in the school systems, hopefully with one-time costs to bring up or to address more critical needs. But those continuation costs are definitely not there. So if we don't have any form or any way to fund these continuing expenditures, when I'm looking at this, it's 15 years, and we had a per pupil increase of the 2.75 once, and then a small one after that. Costs are going up, so we've got to me as a group, really seriously discuss that and plan for that to occur.
Thank you, Ms. Bouquet, appreciate that, great point. And in indicating dual enrollment opportunities we have for dual enrollment, Dr. Brumley, can you please speak about early childhood? Because there was a request there or funding coming from the governor.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway. So, I may not have the exact numbers right because I don't,
okay.
but I believe what is in the executive budget in terms of early childhood is just over $50 million additional annual dollars. So right now, I believe that we have roughly 35, and you guys give me some room on this, but we have roughly 35 million annually for the early care program. And so the additional is supposed to be just over 50 million. So whatever it is, if you add the 30 and the 50 plus, it comes up to like just over 90 million, which matches the federal annual contribution. Our original request to the administration was 60 million of recurring for early care. And so it ended up being like 50 that's in the executive budget, which is the most historic early care investment I think our state has ever seen. So I think that if that budget were to just pass, it would be just over $90 million of recurring early care. But also there's a 20 million, which I think is really smart, the 20 million that's being placed in the early care incentive fund, which that's the funding source that locals can match 1-for-1. We had conversations about 10 million for that fund, and it ended up being 20 million that's in the executive budget. So I would say, without the numbers in front of me, somewhere over 50 million of additional dollars annually for early care, which brings the total to 90 million, plus 20 million in the incentive fund.
Great, thank you. Gives you a little bit more info. Any other questions before we go into it? Yes, I'm so sorry.
This one's for Beth. Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been out of the school system for a while. School systems can pay their teachers. So basically, if we do have a chemistry teacher that we want to hire, we can pay them more than an 11th grade teacher, correct?
Yeah, there's no salary schedule in effect of state right now.
So I just wanted to confirm that, because most people don't know that. The other thing too is, yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Beth.
I just wanted to share just 2 bits of information I thought might be helpful to the discussion.
Michael?
Okay.
Sorry.
2 bits of statistics. One is that there are 42 of our Louisiana school systems across traditional city, parish, and all the charter schools that are currently rated as being rural, according to the federal guidance. So just a tidbit there. 42. 42. Yeah, that includes charters. Yes.
Each charter is each how we get, correct?
Yes. that's
Not all
actually-
charters, but the
Type
two
twos.
are.
Do you have the breakdown of which ones are school systems and which ones are charters?
We have information on that we can send out. It's something that's published on a link that I can send to Shan. It comes from the U.S. Department of Education file. Also, I want to make just another note on number 2. The 49 million, that's just the number based on the number of teacher staff, as this proposal talks about basing this on teachers alone, so that would not be inclusive of all the staff that we pay raises on. And there would be cost on top of that for the retirement benefits. Next year, that would be like 24.1%. So you would be adding about $11 million to that cost if that were to go through. We just hadn't calculated that yet. That's it.
Thank you. Any other questions in regards to?
So that object code 112 is just classroom teachers. So it's not counselors, librarians, any of those ancillary groups, correct?
Okay. We're all good. We're going to go to a substitute motion.
Before the substitute motion, I just want to clarify that this has the effect of raising the average teacher pay in Louisiana by $3,000.
Understands that? Okay, thank you, Dr. Berman. And Beth. Substitute motion. Ms. Cynthia Posey.
Before I make the substitute motion, I'd like to just make a few comments. First, to thank Superintendent Brumley for trying to come up with something that's fair. I know it's hard. I know that everybody, the school systems, the charters, everybody needs money. So when we talk about the pay raises that have been done the last 3 pay raises, over half of that, if you have a family and you have OGB benefits, half of that's been eaten up already. And that's not just for teachers, but for certified staff as well. Also, there's been a lot of mention of the increased cost of school systems. Our teachers feel that too. Our support staff feels that too. You know, they suffer just as much from inflation, high gas prices, things like that. And then, you know, we've talked about reaching the Southern Regional average. That would be great. It would be great to reach the national average, but the pay raise suggested does not put us at the Southern Regional average. And again, always remember that's a moving target, because if you watch the news, you can see many states around us and all over the country are giving substantially more pay raises than what we're considering right now. And again, I appreciate the effort that you made, Superintendent Brumley. What I would like to suggest is that we do need to give more of a pay raise, because when we talk about differentiating out pay raises, all of our teachers need a pay raise, all of our support staff need a pay raise. When we talked about how Louisiana, our reading scores, we saw more of an increase than any other state, we didn't say, oh, but it was just the highly effective teachers that did that. It was everybody in those schools that, you know, for that increase, for that staff, and for all the other benchmarks that we hit. And so I think it would be fair to say, let's hit the Southern Regional average, what it is right now, $4,000 for teachers, and also $2,000 for staff. You know, we need to be fair, and I think that's a fair way to do it, because it's everybody in the schools. They're working with our students every day. And if we want to keep people in the schools, you know, there's a lot of talk, maybe we have a teacher crisis, a teacher shortage, maybe we don't. If you're in the schools every day, we do have one. We have one. And we need to make every effort to make sure that we get people in the profession and keep them in the profession. Thank you.
What's your motion? I'm sorry, second. So your motion is?
Just, can you state it specifically? A $4,000 pay raise for teachers and a $2,000 pay raise for support staff.
And everything, none of this others, none of the one or three that Ms. Dr.
I apologize. Yeah, and I'm speaking just for number one, but certainly include two and three.
Okay, so
One and two. That's for number one, but is including number 2 and 3. No changes.
I second.
Second her substitute.
Yes.
Tia?
Can I
Sure, Tia.
Okay, so I'm glad that the Southern Regional average and the Louisiana average was lifted up, and Cynthia hinted on it also, but I want to go further on to the national average. For example, only 57%, I'm sorry, Dr. Tia Mills, president of the Louisiana Association of Educators. Only 57% of America's teachers earn less than $60,000. So we are 46th in the country when it comes to that. 19% of our state's teachers earn $60,000 a year. And our support professionals, of course, are far worse than that. We must move the needle so that our educators can put their best effort forward without having to work multiple jobs. I have quite a few colleagues and friends sacrificing their entire paychecks for health insurance costs. Again, thank you for lifting that up, Ms. Posey, because on the federal level, there is a bill that is being proposed currently to have the starting salaries for teachers at $60,000 a year. And so I think that's a move. The $4,000 would be a move in the right direction, as well as the $2,000 for support professionals. And so we do recognize that there are some efforts that are being made to get us there, and I do appreciate everything that you have done, Superintendent Brumley. Please make no mistake about that. But we need to go after as much as we can. We have a huge critical shortage, not just in our state, but across the nation. and we have to do what's necessary in order to be intentional in getting our educators to continue to stay in the profession and to entice more to come into the profession. Thank you.
All right, ready for a vote?
Well,
1 second, we want to make sure.
no, just didn't know if there was any more discussion or any
any more
other
discussion?
substitutes. You can have more than one substitute.
Issue of substitution out there.
You two gentlemen seem to have it. Go.
Trying to figure it out.
Okay.
I'd like to go with number 1 to 2,000, 1,000, as proposed.
So are you making a motion?
Yes, making a
Substitute
motion. Number 2, introduce the, I think we just wait and put that, the locals can make that decision. Why are we deciding how that's going to go through the workforce development when, if it goes, let's just say it's 49 million gets approved and is added, the locals and the boards there can make a decision if we want to pay a chemistry teacher, if we want to do it that way. I'm not for number 3. I'd like to put that into dual enrollment. I know it's only 1.5 million, but we've all sat here and discussed the cost of what dual enrollment is about to go up. I'm running out of dual enrollment money, and I'd like to do that and also add a 2.75 to level 1. Cost of, I can just tell you right now, last year, the property insurance on my facility went up over $250,000, and it's going to go up again. The cost of fuel. I think if that goes in for all the kids, we should be okay with that. That's what I'd like to propose.
I want to clarify number 2. So you want to leave number 2, but not, did you say? You
I'd like to
money,
take,
but
I would
not-
like to leave 2, but take off all the rules
Right.
to it. As it goes to the teachers and the local districts make the decision on it.
Introduced.
Well, you just wanted to take out number 3.
Take out
Take out 3 and add dual enrollment. That go into a fund for dual enrollment.
What was your funding for dual enrollment?
Well, the remaining 1.5 million goes into dual enrollment. It's not a lot, but it's something to help.
Oh, gotcha.
And then the fourth
Yeah.
one, 2.75, level 1.
Okay.
Number 1 stays the same?
Yes.
Is there a second to?
Oh, not Carolyn.
Carolyn? No, it was, I thought it was somebody else. You're seconding? Seconded.
And with the caveat, I would love to work more on this apprenticeship stuff and make this a priority for all of us, so we can have all students have access to that, because that is a great opportunity.
Do all of you have that?
Can I ask a follow-up to Beth? Beth, what is the 2.75 increase? We ask every year and I never remember.
Currently, it's $80 million.
How much, I'm sorry?
80.
Dr. Tia?
Yes, I have a question for the maker of the motion. In the motion, you indicated the 2,000, 1,000. Is that contingent? Is that's going to stay that way unless additional revenue is recognized?
Yeah, if additional revenue is going to go.
We need to make sure.
Yeah, I think that's, everybody's going to agree to that one, yeah.
Okay, but it's important that you say that so we can know.
It's a recommendation going forward to Bessie. Yes, Mr. Dresden, welcome.
So I'm looking at Mr. Hartley across the way here, watching his body language as he's moving around in his chair.
He has none, he's just relaxed.
So my question as it relates to the last substitute motion, because this has to actually get through the legislature, I'd like your thoughts on that last proposal. It adds a hefty sum to the recommendation. So thoughts, suggestions, advice to this body?
Well, I know the governor would like to meet everyone's request, but when you sit in that chair in that office, there's many requests coming, especially in years where you have a surplus. So his push this year, as previous years, is for ultimately a $3,000 pay raise for certificated staff and $1,500 for support personnel. And that's what he's pushing for, because if you go talking about 2.75, bring the legislature in too, and I know Senator Fields, if he's still here, you know, they are looking, as Dr. Brumby said, they're looking at the money from the federal dollars, COVID dollars too. So it's a decision he's made just to push for teacher salaries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you, Ms. Castillo. Yes. Okay, see you. Go ahead, Dr.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I understand and see. So the substitute motion is essentially the original. We have the 2,000, 1,000, and that is in the MFP. And then the number 2, and I think we all understand, but just to clarify, that is if additional money is recognized in REC. That would, oh, actually, I should go back. On number 1, and it would also include the 2.75. That's number 1. It gets added to the MFP, not contingent.
For me, for me, this is not contingent on the REC doing anything. This is what I'm saying, we should push and let them make a decision.
Right. I guess the substitute motion is the number 1. The things that would not be contingent on REC money would be the 2,000 and 1,000 and the 2.75, or roughly $80 million. That's okay. And the number 2 is basically the same proposal, except rather than meeting these particular categories, it would be just a block amount, and then the school districts would figure that out. Yeah, a quick question there in terms of concern is, one concern I think this is a great proposal for differential pay, and I'm fine with having more flexibility. My concern would be path of least resistance, and a lot of school boards will see if we don't want to deal with that, we're just going to across the board pay raises, which would be, I think, not in the spirit of how this money is given. Is that a concern, or you don't care?
Well, it depends on your locals. It depends if they wanted to put it where highly efficient teachers, or like you said, it may not be a chemistry teacher, but running it through the workforce development doesn't give your locals a choice of what they want. We're going to have to figure out, have somebody else approve what you're going to do from there. Once it's approved, you've got a board, and that board's going to make that decision if you're going to give extra, because then you run across the issue where you're going to give more money on this side. What happens to teachers that are doing the job they're already doing, and you're going to give more money for them to come over here and teach high school chemistry or to a lower performing school, then we get the kickback, well, we're doing our job. Why are you punishing us and not giving us that?
So that only makes me think you're more likely to just do it across the board pay raise.
I would love that, yes.
Well, I think we're going to stipulate differentiated. It has to be a different.
Well, that's different. I want to make sure, because if not, Superintendent Claxton is saying. He is saying it'd be okay under his proposal that you could do an across the board pay raise, and I would like to see this as being, you can leave out the school boards as long as it's not different, as long as it's some differentiated pay, and not across the board. That is.
I would love across the board the 3,000, 1,000, but we're not guaranteed that, but we can ask for it. And that's, the big part that's really getting to me and trying to fit in here, what somebody presented and us making all these different amendments, it gets like a puzzle. We try to figure this out. The 2.75 is very important in the raise to all our staff. But then as you start going, dual enrollment. I mean, I'm out of dual enrollment money this spring, and the cost is going up. So I would love to see that more kick in to be able to send these kids to get their dual enrollment.
Look, and I generally, historically in these meetings, I pushed for, I always thought it made more sense to do a formula increase and do it at school boards and have them spend it that way, as opposed to, say, teacher pay raises, which is what it could be used for. That said, I don't think the superintendent is wrong in terms of the $2.1 billion. That's going to be very difficult. I'm not saying policy-wise that is the correct move. I'm just saying I think that's a recognition of reality. And I understand what we're doing here is also a statement of priorities. And I do.
Excuse me one second.
Sure.
What did you say? Was there a fine? 2.1?
That's what I heard 2.1 billion is last I checked.
For the 2.75 increase?
No, for the federal money.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's the pot of money that people are looking and are saying.
Gotcha.
That's creating the political optical problem.
You mean the COVID money?
The COVID, yeah.
That we understand.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Okay, on the,
Is it pertaining to him? Is it, wait a minute. Hold on.
oh, sure. Let me finish this one. And on the number 3, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but what is the issue with the apprenticeships that are, as I understand it, they're not allowed, the people the businesses you're talking to, they are not allowing people that are under 18 to come work on their campus, on their place of business? Or is it they can't do any apprenticeship, or there's no shadowing or anything like that?
We already work with them, but they can't get on their, have a mill. They can't get on the mill unless they're 18 or older. So that stops a lot of our juniors and seniors.
And is that like a liability legal thing? That's not a
That's
state
their,
law.
that's their thing. So when you have a
That's
mill that runs where I
Okay.
live, that is the livelihood of what we do. Yes, we have a hospital. We have our own CNA program. Yes, we have agreements with the nursing home. Our CNA goes in and works in the nursing home. We have those things in place. So what we're trying to do, and I don't want to give everybody a schooling on what we do in Jackson Parish, but I don't mind. We're trying to find ways to even give certifications. You know, we had in the past, I think it was Representative Senator Jim Fannin worked to get Delta Community College in Jackson Parish. Now we're paying for dual enrollment. The whole process of that was to be open door policy that cost nobody to come in and get certifications. Well, now we're paying money for that. And the school system does have a partnership with that. But trying to get a pathway or something, not all those kids are going to do that. So we're fighting to get certifications to come in. Let's do a forklift certification. Let's do some other certifications that they may not even get a degree.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure I understood the problem.
Yes,
It wasn't a state law or a Bessie rule.
No, it
It's that
is the main businesses, and we're lucky they're there.
they don't want to get injured or have an injury.
It's their main corporate office's rules, yes.
Chairman Holloway, could I ask Ken Bradford to speak on the agency with the friendships?
Sure.
Ken Bradford, Chief of Staff here at the Department of Education. I've been with the Jump Start program since 2014 when it was named in legislation. I did want to just bring a couple points of clarity. So when we're talking about registered apprenticeships, we're looking at $3,500 is in the proposal, $2,500 for urban areas. What this would do is this would run through the course choice program. Bessie is authorized through Act 482 from 2014 to set up a process whereby they approve a set of providers. And then, so what would happen is, if your mill, for instance, said, we want to start a registered apprenticeship program, they would go to the State Apprenticeship Council, it would get approved as a registered apprenticeship program. Bessie then would have a catalog, and we bring that forward to them and say, this particular mill has a registered apprenticeship by the State Apprenticeship Council. It would get put in the portfolio, and then when students from your parish, you enroll them. Act 482 allows you to give the yes or no whether they can enroll. When they enrolled in the apprenticeship program, you would then generate the $3,500, which would then pay the mill, which would allow that money to go to them. I would say that I've heard about, we've been talking about the age requirements, et cetera, but very specific to apprenticeships. Chapter 4 of the revised statute, Title 23, actually allows students, minors, to work in the manufacturing industry if it's part of a registered apprenticeship. So in the scenario outlined, if apprenticeships are cultivated, students can go working them in the manufacturing industry. So I just wanted to make clear, because there's a misconception that students can't work. Maybe they couldn't work perhaps normally as a 17-year-old, but if they're part of an approved apprenticeship, they can.
And I've sat with that mill and asked them to come up with something for us to help us find a pathway to feed our kids into the mill. And that, like I said, that's the livelihood. And number one, they tell me, you've got to be 18 to get on our campus. And then on the other part, they can come to us, and that's what we're working on, where they can bring the equipment to our facility, which would be the school or Delta, to do these certifications. And that's been my banging my head on. Because I would love to have those kids go to a program where they hire them directly out or send them to where they want them trained, and we'd be better off.
And there have been school systems that they themselves have become registered apprenticeship providers. So there would be nothing also prohibiting a school system from saying we want to have a welding program. We have welders in our school system. We want to have an HVAC program because we have HVAC. The students could do the apprenticeship in the school system as well.
Any other questions? appreciate it. Okay, but are there any questions?
Oh, no, not really.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Tim?
In regards to the 2.75 in level one, did we give an amount for that?
80 million.
At 80 million, so it is 80 million, okay, I wanted to clarify that. In addition to that, I also wanted to mention this, I don't think at any point we had a conversation about MBCTs and what we can do to incentivize educators to obtain that level of professional development. I think that it may be a discussion for another time, but I do believe that it's something worth exploring in the future. If we're going to have a conversation about educators receiving incentives based on their performance and educators receiving incentives based on them becoming mentor teachers. I think that those educators also are more than worthy of being lifted up as well.
Thank you, Tim.
Can I clarify? When you're talking about national board and just other things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Rowe.
Just trying to get numbers back in my head, please. If there was, if his proposal was to do $3,000, is that right? Or keep it?
Going with the 2,000, 1,000 contingent on the other 1,000 from the government.
Got it, thank you. What would, if it was the 3,000 for certificated, what's that number look like? Like we have 196.5 for how it is now. If you went to 3,000 and 2,000, what, do you know what your number would be?
Well, you can pretty much
It's
just.
half of that.
I don't
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't do
it's
math.
almost $200 million for a 2,000 and a 1,000, so you would be.
I guess I'm still, like, I like the differentiated. I think that's different, it's unique from what we've done before. I like that. But I'm still just struggling with this. We seem to be doing this thing where we're putting everything in level 4, taking away decisions for those inside the schools to make decisions because it's like the politically easy thing to do. I mean, to be able to say you did teacher pay raises seems to be the reason we're doing it this way. That's why I was asking about the history of the level 4 funding and how that's worked in the past. So, you know, if we think the 2.75 is going to be hard to get to, adding that on top of what's here already, I'm struggling with that, and I'm wondering why you don't just turn number 2 into the 2.75. And again, I like the differentiated, but we take the position that dollars should go to level 1 and that leadership should be deciding what makes the most sense for their teachers and their students at the local level. So that's why I was asking about $3,000 pay raise for teachers and the $2,000 for the support workers, what that number, how much that increases what we have here, and potentially dropping number 2 and changing that into the 2.75. I have no problem with the apprenticeship. It's $1.5 million. We're talking about, what, a $9 billion budget? I'm like, surely we can find $1.5 million for apprenticeship. But I hear on dual enrollment. But again, I just go to, if you have dollars coming in through level 1, you can spend it on the things that you value and you prioritize. For some, that may be teacher salaries. For others, that could be dual enrollment, like just the cost in general. I don't think the 2.75 even just covers our just natural increase in cost, but I think that LAPCS is taking a position that we want level 1 funding. And so my proposal would be, I would put on the table the $3,000 on number 1, $3,000 pay raise for teachers, $2,000 for support worker. Number 2 would be bumped off and it would become a 2.75 increase, and I would maintain number 3.
3,000, 2,000? Yes. Not 3,000, 1,500, right?
I do 3,000. If we're going up, yeah, I would do 3,000, 2,000, but somebody could talk me out of that.
Yes, Mr. Alexander.
So, I don't know what the order here is, right? But I really like when this one was going. I really do. I'd like to say 1,500, like it was, just from a dollar standpoint. I don't know what those dollars are. I do agree with number 2 becoming a 2.75%. That helps us, and I get the point about incentives. I really do. And we actually, in our district, have a high need area that we did incentivize. But I may be in a district that doesn't have any of that, and I'm going to just end up putting it out there across the board somehow anyway. So I like where we're going. I'm not sure how to go about defining this number 2 here just yet. It's a $50 million ask. The 2.75 is an $80 million ask. I know they're not the same, but they're close. They're closer.
60,000.
But I would like to suggest too, and I agree with you, 1.5 million, I don't want to get here and saw sawdust over $1.5 million, but I would like to see that being just included in districts being able to use that for dual enrollment, because I don't think we fully all are able yet to move toward an apprenticeship program. And I'm in an area where we with our partnership with ABC, it's still a struggle there. I mean, it's just, we're not finding a lot of leverage. I'd love to put the 1.5 million just into SCA funding for us to just expand that. So I don't know if it's in good order to do a substitute to the substitute to the substitute to the substitute.
Why can't it be dual enrollment / apprenticeship, depending on your,
okay, so dual enrollment, put 1.5 million for dual
depending
enrollment
on your
/
district.
Yeah.
Your
So,
needs.
yeah, so I'm suggesting 3,000, 1,500, which, you know, and then 2.75%.
3,050, but not a contingency. Because what I was going to say about the contingency is if you do that and the money is recognized, it's got to come back anyway to the board. So you could at that point decide, do you want to put it in this 1 or this 2 or whatever. So I would just either go for it, or I mean, I recommend in your motion.
I like where Ms. Roma was going with that. So 3,000, 1,500 though, I was gonna leave it in the same ratios. It's, you know, 100% one and 50% of that 100% from certified to non-certified support, how you divide that up. A 2.75% in place of number 2.
In level 1.
In level 1, yes. And then 1.5 million addition in SCA to be used for either dual enrollment or apprenticeship.
Is that level 4, Beth?
Yes.
Dual and apprenticeship.
Just to clarify, would y'all want the 1.5 million separate and apart than the current SCA calculation? Yeah, okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think that's what, yeah.
Just want to have an opportunity to use the money as well,
See,
whether we have an
it
apprenticeship
said,
program.
like apprenticeship or dual enrollment. It's a nice choice.
Because dual enrollment is currently an eligible expense in SCA, so you could add it to the SCA allocation and just increase that on a per pupil basis to about 1.5 million, or it can be a separate, you know, category of $1.5 million for these two purposes.
I think that makes
So how would the 1.5, if it would go in the SCA money, or the SCA allocation, would that just be in addition to what we already have now? The 1.5, I mean.
Right, we would increase the per pupil amount that we allocate for the, based on the number of students that we have. We just increase it by the $1.5 million, whatever that was.
And then the school systems could decide the apprenticeships way or dual enrollment.
Right,
Because
it already
currently,
includes the word dual enrollment, you know, for courses outside.
Okay.
We could add some language to specify that apprenticeships were, you know, an appropriate expense now, if that were, you know, the director of the committee, or it can be separate and apart, depending on how much transparency you want on just the money for supplementships and dual enrollment.
supplemental course, is that what you're saying? It's SCA?
Yeah,
Oh,
SCA.
I'm trying to get the wording for the
Yeah,
motion.
the SCA.
so those who could do apprenticeships could choose that route as well.
I like this. Yes, Ms. Camille.
What is the current SCA allocation?
How much money is
In,
there?
the total amount, well, it went up to $70 per student. Let me look up the
I'm just
total
curious
amount.
how much 1.5 million is adding. You know, we're already spending. X.
Supplemental course allocations for fiscal year 23, $21 million.
21 million, so this adds 5%.
Hey, y'all are doing great.
We have a second on.
Second.
I'll make a second.
Who did the first? Dave did.
That David did that, just David did the second.
It's true. Okay.
I got a
Question before we. Go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, that's partially what I was going to do as well, is what I'm saying. So, all right, as I understand it, the most recent motion is instead of 2,000 for certified teachers and 1,000 for support, it'd be 3,000 and 1.5, which would have a rough ballpark figure of an additional 100 million above and beyond. I'm kind of looking at that, what was anticipated in the executive budget. Does that sound roughly correct?
That's what I'm checking to see if that here.
Okay. Assuming we don't hear clarification on that. And then anticipating if there is additional money recognized by the REC, so I'm in number 2, we would eliminate differential pay. So there's no differential pay in this proposal, but there is 2.75, which is roughly about $20 million more than what the superintendent had sort of put down.
No, we're not putting any language about in the event, I don't think.
So the 2.75 is just requested. That's not, okay. All right. Okay, all right, so I understand. Also makes my life a little easier. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, please review the motion.
All right, so the motion is to include a pay raise of $3,000 for certified staff and $1,500 for non-certified support staff in level 4 of the formula. In level 4 of the formula. Include an increase in level 1 of 2.75 and increase the supplemental course allocation per pupil in level 4 by 1.5 million overall.
You made that sound so easy.
Well, I've been sitting here thinking about it. Okay, is that it?
So last year when we increased the supplemental course allocation, Dr. Bromley, do you remember how much the whole pot of money was of that increase? I think it was like $4 a student or whatever.
It was more than that, so I don't know the amount.
For the last choice, that's a good thing.
Can we get a total dollar amount on this new proposal? Roughly, are we looking at more like $350 million to $400 million? And we know that the executive budget currently only has 196. Is that, am I estimating that accurately?
Well, you're looking at about $100 million for the additional pay raises, and $80 million for the 2.75, and 1.5 is the amount currently for the,
So more than double what is currently in the executive budget, over 400 million. Okay. Without contingency language, so we'd be asking the legislature to find an additional 200 million.
No.
No, it's not contingent, so they would just have to find it within the current available funds.
Any other questions? Discussion? Okay, yes, Mr. Davis.
Do we have a number of how many schools returned that SCA dollars to the state last year and how much that was?
in the reallocation you're talking about at the end of the year, we do have, let me just pull that up. But there were some schools who did not spend that money and instead it went to the schools that were, systems that were using those dollars. Do you have, was that it? Any questions?
And Beth, if you can tell us traditional school systems and then charter schools as well.
Are you asking about that question?
Yes.
Yeah, that, I didn't know if she knew.
Yes.
Hey,
Right.
public comment.
Public comments, Mr. Mike Falk. Please come forward, and we'll get the answers from Beth after public comments.
Do you need for me to get a mic, or can you hear me? Okay, thank you, Janet. Oh, I don't want to confuse the issue any more than it already has, but slide 2 of the presentation says is the responsibility of Bessie to determine the minimum cost of a program of education. I believe that 1996 was the last time the cost of a minimum program of education was determined. It's hard for me to imagine that the cost of educating a child has not increased in 27 years. I believe it's time that we look at the actual cost of what needs to be a minimum program. Slide 15 that you have. From 2014 to 2022, local revenues in the MFP increased by $674 million. State MFP funding increased by a total of $387 million. The local school systems increased almost twice as much as the state did in funding education. State revenues in 2022-23, the MFP state funding was $4 billion. The local revenues on the same budget letter in 2022-23 was $4.1 billion. The local districts are putting up more of the cost of education than 65-35. 1996 to 2000, Governor Mike Foster committed to fully funding the MFP per pupil. That was done by the year 2000. From 2000 to 2008, the MFP per pupil amount increased 2.75% every year. In 2008, the increases stopped. From 2008 to 2022, 14 years, there were 2 increases in the per pupil amount, one for 2.75% and one for 1.25%. It's time that we fund a minimum program of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Next one there, Mr. Garvey.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway. And it's no for the record that I'm not here representing Bessie. I'm here representing just myself. I'd like to start by saying that I've always looked at submission of the MFP proposal, I think you would call it that, to the legislature with the thought that it's something that you have to really think about how the politics are going to work when you send it over. The governor makes some proposals that have an effect on the MFP and have an effect on what Bessie members think about what can we get, what will get approval at the legislature. So you take into account what the governor proposes. And then you take into account the general situation in the state. Is the state flush with money, flush with a lot of money, just a little bit of money? Is there a deficit coming up? And with that in mind, I'll point specifically to the size of this request being double, or more than double, I think Ms. Schino said, double what the governor is saying is likely to get approved by the legislature. Now, he doesn't have a perfect crystal ball, but he has a pretty good idea. The superintendent proposed something that was, I think, maybe 20% above, which maybe is in the range of what most people would say, you might be able to get away with 20%. But 100% increase, doubling what the governor says he thinks could be achievable, I think is tilting at windmills. I don't think it's possible. I think what you're going to have is you're going to have in the middle of the legislature or towards the end of the legislature. In the last 2 days, a lot of times, in the past 16 years, it's when the rejection has happened, when it's too late for Bessie to come back and react and send over another proposal. So my thought, my suggestion to you is that going with the current proposal is taking a huge risk of having no MFP passed. And with that in mind, I would recommend going back to the superintendent's original proposal. I would like to also address the differentiated pay issue. Letting school systems decide whatever they think is best is a very good idea. Forcing some money into a differentiated pay goes against that to some extent. The reason behind it is that, in my experience, a lot of school board members don't realize that they can do differentiated pay. And there is a need to do it. There's a lot of areas where teachers are needed, much more so than in other areas. The high poverty schools in particular, those are typically loaded up with brand new teachers that have almost no experience. But if you, in our experience in Jefferson Parish, when you pay those teachers more, when you differentiate their pay, you get teachers with more experience willing to go into those high, hard to educate situations. So I would suggest that keeping that differentiated pay is important. It goes a little bit against letting schools do what they want to do or what they think is best, but it also gives them some wiggle room. As you can see, they can spend it in a lot of different areas. They still have a lot of choice, as Ms. Romer pointed out. And then finally to the apprenticeship part of this, as I think was mentioned today, some people have been working on apprenticeship programs and haven't quite gotten their program across the finish line. We heard that some of the employers out there don't want the extra liability of these students under 18 being on their campuses. I didn't hear any suggestion, maybe it was made, I don't know, but I didn't hear anyone say that they offered for the school system to buy, say, a $10 million insurance policy to indemnify those employers for any injury that might occur to those students. With a $10 million indemnity policy, that employer might say, you know, maybe it's a good idea, maybe we can do this and not have any risk to our bottom line. And I mention that because if you put $1.5 million into a pot that can only be used for apprenticeships, you'll get the out-of-the-box type thinking, such as let's offer a $10 million insurance policy. I think you'll have more people focusing on this issue and focusing on new ways to get this done that we're not getting focused on right now, because as we all know, incentives get people to do things. And if you incentivize apprenticeships with $1.5 million, I think you'll get more apprenticeship programs across the finish line because of the incentive. So my suggestion would be to not go tilting at windmills, trying to get a doubling of the amount of money that is being proposed, but to go back to the original proposal by the superintendent and to keep in the incentive pieces that he has laid out with differentiated pay and the apprenticeship program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordy. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we take a roll call vote?
Janet, did you get your question answered?
Yes.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Let me just make the comment, because Mr. Garvin makes a lot of good points. He really does. You know, and many of which I agree with. And I know I say this all the time, but I was on the original MFP in 1990 and 1991, I know, when we did this initially. And the thinking at that time was that per pupil was going to increase steadily. At first, it was going to be tied to the CPI, and we were going to analyze it each and every year for the increase. The original amount of per pupil that was decided upon at that time was we took all the money spent on public education right before that and divided it by the total number of kids, and we came up with a per pupil. Then we went to these ancillary pieces, like transportation and whatever, and which was a nightmare because they couldn't figure out, because people on their buses, others contracted, it was just a mess, rural, whatever. So you took that pot of money, added it into the per pupil. The difference with the weighted, all these weights was not originally because they cost more to do. The weights are put in there because there was disproportionality in those particular areas. Because if there wasn't disproportionality district by district, you would take the cost and add it into the per pupil. But when you looked at economically disadvantaged, or you looked at gifted and talented, or you looked at these different areas that had weights, in some school systems, it was a much higher number of kids, a percentage of kids, and some in lower. And whenever you have that disproportionality among districts, then that was the reason for the weights. If they would have all followed that same linear progression, or whatever you call it in statistics, Ronnie, if they had all followed pretty much along that line, then you take that and you add it into the per pupil, because that's the cost. So that was the reason for the weights. Then we did the 67-33 split, not 65-35. And we looked at what local school districts contributed. And the whole point was to get the locals to begin to tax themselves to put up more of a local share. And that's the genesis or the birth of level 2 at that point, because many school systems did not put up a sufficient local share in the minds of, people everybody was looking at. So now if you look at level 2, everybody does. So those local tax revenues, or those millages that, or sales taxes that districts and communities tax themselves with, increase that to where everybody is pretty much meeting, their local 2 revenue threshold. So things have changed, and what Mike has come up and said, if you look at the last few years, the local school districts have been taxing themselves more and more and more, because there is no 65, there's no 67-33 split, there's no 65-35 split at the end. That 65-35 split is only in the level 1. But when you put the whole thing together, the local districts, when he quoted, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I trust Mike, that it was almost like a 50-50. He came up with 300 and some odd million and 300 and some odd million, right? So the locals have been doing, in all of these years, progressively more and more to fund education within their communities. And there's got to be a point at which, whether you're a traditional school or a charter school, because it always calculates the same way, there's a point at which, are we really looking at a 65-35 split with state and local? Or how much more do we expect the locals to absorb if we don't continue to hold up the state's end of this? And when we're looking at 14 years, whatever this is, how many years, with such a minimal increase in the per pupil in level 1, how long do we keep this? Every year we sit here, every single year we sit here, and we say, oh, we can't do it this year. Either the state doesn't have any money, or now they have too much money, or not too much, but more money, but we're going to put it someplace else or whatever. When does it become K-12's turn to look at an increase in the per pupil? Now, we've gone around this year after year. Look at the proliferation in level 4. Every time we want to do something, it's like, well, we can get it through the legislature if we just earmark it and put it in. Look at all the things that we've added in. If we kept putting a lot of this, even the raises and such, into that per pupil, then that friction would occur at the local level where you're going to have to raise the salaries, or you're going to fund these particular programs. But, you know, Mike's got a point in that, what is the minimum cost? How do we get to the point, you know, I'm tired of bashing the local school boards to say, well, they might never do that unless you mandate they do this differentiated this. They don't know what's best in their local communities. And I'll sit here as a district superintendent and say, I know what's best in my local community or where I need to put the money. So don't maybe hamstring what we're trying to do. And then if that local community doesn't produce adequate outcomes, then you deal with it. So I don't know what I'm saying other than just rambling a little bit.
Thank you,
But
Ms.
I'm
Boccia.
just tired,
You know what
I'm just
you're
tired
doing.
of 14 years of, well, not this year. Let's wait till the state has a little bit more money. Well, not this year, but let's take this big chunk and go put it over here. And let's
Thank you.
increase this and that and the other.
Thank you for your knowledge.
So,
Appreciate
well,
that.
it's just that at some point, even if Bessie or whatever, if they don't do, we don't do the 2.75, I think there's got to be an acknowledgement somewhere. And if this task force believes in that, there's got to be an acknowledgement somewhere that that per pupil cost with the intended flexibility has to increase at some point.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you. And we have a question, Mr. Barry? No? Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. I thought you had your hand up.
No.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, I appreciate it. All right, roll call.
I didn't have a quick question.
Wait 1 second.
Mr.
Excuse me,
Castillo.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, Mr. Castillo had to step out, he asked me to proxy for him. So before you take a roll call vote, I just want to be clear. My understanding is that a proxy cannot vote.
Correct.
Thank you.
And we have Aaron here that will
Say
announce
who's
that.
proxy.
Go right ahead. Yeah, thank you for asking. Aaron?
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Wait,
We're
one.
voting on what I just reiterated, the 3,000, 1,500, 2.75, and 1.5.
Mr. Alexander votes yes. Dr. Bromley?
No, because of the additional spending we send to the legislature.
Dr. Bromley votes no. Mr. Castillo has a proxy. Mr. Claxton?
Yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Ms. Conway?
No.
Ms. Conway votes no. Dr. Corville has a proxy. Mr. David?
He left.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mr. Davis?
No.
Mr. Davis votes no. Mr. Irwin?
No.
Mr. Irwin votes no. Senator Fields?
He left.
Ms. Grimm?
No.
Ms. Grimm votes no. Mr. Hartley?
Abstain.
Mr. Hartley abstains. Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes. Ms. LaFleur?
I'm going to abstain. I'll abstain.
Ms. LaFleur abstains. Dr. Mills?
No.
Dr. Mills votes no. Ms. Polito has a proxy. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
No.
Ms. Posey votes no. Dr. Procopio?
No.
Dr. Procopio votes no. Ms. Romer?
Yes.
Ms. Romer votes yes. Ms. Shirai? Ms. Boccia?
Yes.
Ms. Boccia votes yes.
Motion fails.
Motion fails.
So now we go back to Mr. Claxton's motion, which I'm going to need clarity on.
Are you ready, Ms.?
Yeah, so it was 6 yays and with the abstentions counted as noes because you basically can't include those in the.
So how many?
10 noes. 10 are noes or abstaining, which counts as a
How
no
many
vote.
abstain?
Two.
Sorry, I didn't.
So it's 10 total, 8 noes with 2 abstaining, which basically counts as
And 6, yes.
a. Correct. But then you need to figure that with the overall number of memberships that's still present to find out if it's a majority, but because the votes were low, we know that it didn't pass. So I think Mr. Claxton's motion was to include a pay raise of $2,000 for certified staff and $1,000 for non-certified. I mean, for, not non-certified, for Not support staff.
Leave number 2.
Yeah, he left number 2.
Take the criteria out.
Yep, removing the criteria, and then the 1.5 million in the dual enrollment supplemental course.
And
And the 275 in level 1.
On Superintendent Claxton's proposal here, I don't understand why we would even leave number 2. Like, it seems to me like he's putting 2 in number 1. So to me, it's like, just go ahead and remove number 2 for this particular motion.
Well, I think he left 2 and 1, 2 and 1,000, 2,000 and 1,000, so that's
Yeah,
why.
but what I'm saying is on the original proposal on number 2, what he essentially is asking for, I believe, is just for number 1 to re-advance to 3,000. Because if you're not doing differentiated, you're doing across the board.
Originally, he had left it in there, so I would ask for a
Well,
friendly
but back to
substitution.
number 2, leaving it there, that's 49 million. You go to 300, what does that increase it? Isn't it like more money? So if we left it that way, we're saving a little bit, and it just goes at the discretion of the board. And so I'm not saying the 3,000, 1,000. My originally was the 2,000, 1,000.
And leaving it in the
And leaving your differentiated, but take off the
requirement.
workforce requirements, and let the locals make that decision.
Well, I think we should remove the word differentiated because it's not that at all. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do there with that. That makes sense now that you said that, but I don't think it's differentiated, so I don't.
Well, I think the boards could make that decision.
Well, they can do that with some of the other money already under their MFP that's not designated to the teacher.
So if you're given the 49, what does the 49 come out to be? That's just that's the 1,500 added?
But you can stipulate
It's not the, yeah, you can say differentiated.
Yeah, you can say a block grant differentiated.
I'm fine with that.
So, okay.
I'll repeat it. So, a pay raise of $2,000 for certificated staff and 15 for
1,000.
and then 1,000 for support staff. A differentiated compensation in the amount of roughly 49 million. No, allocated based on the number of teachers in object code 112.
60 million with the retirement contribution.
Yeah.
49 plus 11.
And then 1.5 million in the supplemental course allocation
For dual enrollment.
for dual enrollment, and an increase in level 1 by 2.75.
Yes.
So it's 4.
Or back to the original, kind of the original 3 with some adjustments, and then the 2.75.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so just like, I see that as number 4. I also see the 2.75 as just 1. Those are the,
The reason why is because
There's
275 is in level 1,
Okay,
and
so that's
number
level
1 is in level 4.
but the 2,000 and 1,000 salary adjustment and the 2.75 are not contingent. Those are just increases. The number 2, which would be, as I understand it, it would be differentiated pay, but not necessarily using fees. It would be sent to the school board and said, this is for differentiated pay. But it would be a little bit broader on what they could do. But it would be for differentiated pay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then, and then the dual enrollment, it expands number 3 to also include dual enrollment.
Yes.
So the only additional cost I see above and beyond what the superintendent is putting is the extra $80 million, which would be mandatory if that's not contingent on additional stuff. Okay, all right.
Could I get clarity on Superintendent Claxton? I would like for him to explain what he means by differentiated compensation in 2.
I'll tell you what, why don't we change that? Let's do this, 2,000, 1,000. Let's scratch out the number 2. Totally. Leave the 1.5 for the SCA dual enrollment and add the 2.75 level 1. And you don't have to worry about the differentiated at all. And that gets your money a little bit closer.
So that goes.
So it's a $30 million.
So it's 1, 3, and 4.
No, because one is required and one is contingent on REC. Those are different.
Contingency is going to 3,000.
Well, okay, Superintendent Claxton, what is?
The only thing that's contingent is something that the governor has said outside of this room.
We're not saying.
I have said nothing is contingent.
So, okay, so we were never anticipating that number two, I was under
No.
that misunderstanding. Okay, so yours was not ever contingent on that?
No.
Okay, that clarifies.
So now that I really messed this up,
So you're saying replace number 2 with the per pupil?
yes,
Is that what you're
2.75, yes.
He had 4, he struck number 2, and now he's back to 3.
Who was the second on that?
Keep it at 2,000.
2,000, 1,000, 2.75, level 1, the 2,000, 1,000, level 4, and then we leave 3, the 1.5 million, and just add dual enrollment to it. Yes, yeah.
Janet, are you good with that? That, since you were the second?
Anyone else need clarity?
Is the dual enrollment added with the apprenticeship?
Yeah, I need to do that too.
Well, it would be either the apprenticeship or the dual enrollment could be used. Either or.
Either or, which is true right now with SCA already. This would just be more money in the overall pie.
And districts utilizing the funds as everyone all right?
I feel like I confused everybody.
So 3 options.
It's a $30 million task.
It's still 2 and 1 still.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, back to that, then a 2 is 0.75, and then dual enrollment / apprenticeship. Those are the 3 main categories.
Question, real quick.
Yes.
That's roughly about a $30 million increase to what was proposed in the original. You take 50 million out of 2 and add the 80 million back in on 2.75. It's about $30 million more than what was originally proposed by Superintendent Brown. Is that correct? I just want to be sure I get my numbers.
It's actually 20.
Yeah. 20?
Yes, because that said, if the 2.75 was $80 million ask, you got 49.1 plus $1 million for the related benefits, so that's 60 in my math.
Give or take.
So it's getting us closer to the original.
All right. Ready, Aaron, for roll call? Try again.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander votes yes. Dr. Bromley?
No.
Dr. Bromley votes no. Mr. Castillo has a proxy. Mr. Claxton?
Sure, yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Ms. Conaway? No. Ms. Conaway votes no. Dr. Corville has a proxy. Mr. Davis?
No.
Mr. Davis votes no. Mr. Irwin?
No.
Mr. Irwin votes no. Ms. Grimm?
No.
Ms. Grimm votes no. Mr. Hartley?
Abstain.
Mr. Hartley abstains. Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes. Ms. LaFleur?
Yes.
Ms. LaFleur votes yes. Dr. Mills?
No.
Dr. Mills votes no. Ms. Polito has a proxy. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
No.
Ms. Posey votes no. Dr. Procopio?
No.
Procopio votes no. Ms. Romer?
Yes.
Ms. Romer votes yes. Ms. Boucher?
Yes.
Ms. Boucher votes yes.
It fails, but what's the vote here?
7-8. 7 yeas, 8 nays, 1 abstain.
The overall membership is higher, so it was still. So now we're back to Ms. Posey's motions to increase, to have a certificated increase of 4,000 and support staff of 2,000, 2 and 3 the same, and no 275. Ready? And what part put in here?
That's your number 1.
$4,000 raise for teachers and a $2,000 raise for support. Keep number 2 and 3 the same, and that's it. No, that's 275.
What's number 3, the 1.5? It says it.
Yes,
Yes.
as an apprenticeship, not dual enrollment.
Can you repeat this for clarity?
have a raise of $4,000 for teachers and $2,000 for support staff. Leave number 2 in that Dr. Brumley proposed. Leave number 3 in as an apprenticeship of $1.5 million for apprenticeships only, and that's it.
So what's the extra cost of the 4.2? So it's more than we've even discussed so far.
Aaron, roll call, please.
All right, Mr. Alexander.
No.
Mr. Alexander votes no. Dr. Brumley.
Abstain.
Dr. Brumley abstains. Mr. Castile has a proxy. Mr. Claxton.
No.
Mr. Claxton votes no. Ms. Conway. No. Ms. Conway votes no. Dr. Corville has a proxy. Mr. Davis.
No.
Mr. Davis votes no. Mr. Irwin.
No.
Mr. Irwin votes no. Ms. Grimm.
Yes.
Ms. Grimm votes yes. Mr. Hartley.
Abstain.
Mr. Hartley abstains. Ms. Holloway.
No.
Ms. Holloway votes no. Ms. LaFleur.
No.
Ms. LaFleur votes no. Dr. Mills.
Yes.
Dr. Mills votes yes. Ms. Polito has a proxy. Dr. Pope.
No.
Dr. Pope votes no. Ms. Posey. Yes. Ms. Posey votes yes. Dr. Procopio.
No.
Dr. Procopio votes no. Ms. Romer.
No.
Ms. Romer votes no. Ms. Bochet.
No.
Ms. Bochet votes no.
Motion fails. Now we go back to the original motion of Dr. Brumley, which is written on this piece of paper. Any questions about that? All right, Aaron, well, here we go again.
All right. Mr. Alexander.
What are we voting on?
Yeah,
The
Yes,
original.
Kate's motion.
Kate's motion.
I would,
Unless there,
my own motion.
yeah, you can amend it.
Just hearing the conversation around dual enrollment, which I think is a worthwhile conversation, I want to add a 4 and add $8 million to supplemental course allocation SEA for the purposes of dual enrollment. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the addition of $8 million in SEA for dual enrollment.
We could typically, yeah, okay, for only dual enrollment. Okay, so 3 is increase of supplemental course allocation for apprenticeships in the amount of 1.5, and 4 is 8 million supplemental course allocation for dual enrollment. And then 1 and 2 is the same as on this piece of paper. Any
Number
other
one-
questions?
Number 1 is 2001.
Mhm.
And in lieu of, in case.
Yeah.
one is zero.
Oh, no,
And again, I would
we're not
remind the
saying
effect,
in
the
case.
effect of this is a $3,000 teacher raise.
Yeah, because of number 2, effectively, it's a 3.
For some, not all.
Right.
Number 2 is not for
The
all.
effect on the average is
Get to the average.
The number is the same. I mean, the numbers would increase. Yeah.
with a minimum guarantee of 2,000.
Just a quick comment.
Yes, David.
I just want to say that wherever we go with this, it continues to give me great heartburn that we don't have anything coming in per pupil increases yet another year. So.
I second.
I'm a no.
You're no.
No.
Any more substitutes then?
No, for what?
Well, we've got to get
I'm
some.
just, oftentimes I get sideways with traditional districts on many different issues, but this is one that we just have consistently as an organization talked about, the 2.75. And this vote, if you vote no, it looks like you don't care about teachers.
Right.
And I just want to be on the record, that's not what I'm voting on. I'm voting on, you start telling us how to spend the money, what to spend it on. You bring legislation that tells us how to do it. And so if you're going to tell us all those things, then when it doesn't work out, how does accountability work then? I feel really angry right now that, again, I'll speak as charter schools. Tell us what the standard is. Give us the funding to do it. And if we don't do it well, then we don't get to do it anymore. But we keep having the same every year, and Ms. Boche brought it up. We've heard, this year it's because we have too much money because of COVID. Well, what has it been for the last 10 years? What's the reason then?
The money for code is to replace everything that we had
So,
to do.
again, I do not like, I agree with you. I don't like this vote. And as an organization, we are gonna stand our ground. At some point, you have to increase.
You can amend
the
this.
Okay, I'll make a substitute motion
The
on that.
votes weren't there though.
Well, let's try this. Let's try a substitute
And
motion.
I'd love to know the no's. What is the no on 2.75
Well, I just
beyond
want to
it's too much
clarify
money?
too, this is not about where you stand, but y'all are making a recommendation to Bessie. Bessie is not necessarily going to approve your recommendation. You're telling them what you recommend. So that it does not mean it's going to get sent over the way you approve it. So I think that needs to be
I
clarified.
do understand that. I still would like some of those that are voting no, like what is the no based on? That would be helpful to understand. Is it because you agree with some of the good points Mr. Garvey brought up? It's a lot of money. You're risking getting nothing. Like I sit here and say, okay, I'm risking on behalf of our membership getting nothing. When is the right time to stand up? So it would be helpful to understand if the no is around what is it around? And maybe that helps us. Should we come in and say, okay, fine, you're not doing 2.75, give me half of that. I just don't know what the.
And the board
issues
did
are.
approve half last year.
Yes, we have done that.
Well, if it's about the money, let's go with number one and then cut everything else and add the 2.75 on level one. That's simple.
And districts can utilize the.
Districts take the 2.75 under level one, and it still gives our teachers and support employees a raise. And then we get rid of 2 and 3.
So for the no's, our property insurance has gone up significantly, especially after these hurricanes, over 300%. I can't even imagine, like in New Orleans. Just the cost to do business, gas, electricity, water, food, materials, and supplies. Supply and demand, eggs. Look at how expensive eggs are right now. So for those that are the no's, that's why we're asking for a 2.75. And again, the chart for this explains it thoroughly. Also too, you talk about all the extras in this long poster board here, that is expected on our school systems. So that's why we asked for the extra 2.75, not only from the LSBA standpoint, but you also hear the other associations asking for the school systems as well. And for local autonomy of how to spend that money, whether it's dual enrollment or apprenticeships.
We have 2 people on deck. We have Cynthia Mako and then David Alexander is next.
I can explain our no vote. Our no vote is because we would like to have a larger increase for teacher and support staff salaries. To Janet's point, cost of eggs, that's increased. Insurance has increased. OGB has increased. You know, you talk about this on school systems. No, it's actually on teachers. So we're asking an increasing amount from them every single year, and we've never paid them what they were worth. And that goes for support staff too, so that's our no vote.
So what would be the amount? Is it the 4,000, 2,000? I mean, that's sort of your floor.
Yeah. And
So-
look, the concern about leaving it up into level 1, there is no way that we could be assured that it would go to teachers.
So if the one we had done, if we did a 4,000, 2,000 with a 2.75, you'd be good with that?
What about doing like the 2,000, 1,000, and with the increase in per pupil with the caveat, any district not to the southern regional average must apply it to the teacher on pay raise, and with the portion amount to those, we've done that in the past.
I don't know about every district, but I can say that during this time, our district has given raises. We have been able to give stipends, we've been able to give raises, and work that out the best we can. So,
And we thank you.
and the more that this pulls from us, the less we can give.
Sure, but, you know, again, what I would say, we look at getting the southern regional average. Ms. Boucher, you know, I like that idea, but I would also put the caveat in there, what about our support staff? Because we have to recognize.
Well, that's what I
that
said, a
they're-
proportional amount. In other
Did you-
words, if it's, you take it and you give twice to the teachers, whatever the amount the pot is. Which is what we've done before, except we've made it just for teachers, but we could do it the other way as well. So you could do it, say the 2,000, 1,000, and with the increase in the per pupil, we're dedicated, I don't know, at least half of it to the increasing for districts that don't meet the southern regional average. Because many districts have gone out locally and significantly increased, you know, teacher pay, and others have not been able to do it, even though they have levied additional local taxes. They don't have a tax base large enough to do that. So
Doris, what year was that we
offering
did
that
that?
up.
For the MFP, what year was it 1.375 and if they weren't at the, or 2.75 and if 1.375? And if they weren't at the southern region average, it automatically went to the teacher.
I think it was 1920.
So Doris, you would suggest that we model that?
I don't want to make the motion.
So,
But how would you capture the support staff? I got the SREB stuff, but how would you capture the wording for the support?
Well, we would take the 1.375 and split it among them in a 2-to-1 ratio to any district who is not meeting the SREB for teachers.
Well, but
Superintendent Boucher, would that not have the effect of, just for conversation, would that not have the effect of systems that have less revenue having to put more towards their pay raise, whereas systems that had the ability would get even more of the ability around operational funds?
No
You understand
matter,
what I'm saying?
no matter what we do, there is no perfect way to do this. If we're shooting for the SREB, then we've got to have a mechanism that gets us to that. There are many school districts that exceed the SREB because they have higher a local tax base that can support that kind of initiative. So yes, it could, you know, okay, Superintendent Brumley, yes, it could. But where do we start with this? Or how do we mesh all the needs that we all have? And I mean, when you talk, you know, you talk to the charters, the traditional systems, we're all in the same boat with this. And we're trying to do everything we can to increase teacher salaries and support staff salaries. But we also have to operate it. So if the goal is the SREB and a community and system has already reached that, then they wouldn't necessarily have to divert this. It would be more for operational. If they're not at it, then they've got to take a large chunk of it and work on getting it up to the SREB, I mean, which is something we've done before. And I'm just offering that up for discussion if we're trying to work through both sides of this to come to something that we feel is a viable alternative.
I'd like to make a point on what Ms. Boucher is talking about. So if we do give the money to the teacher, I don't think anybody in this room, let's do 5,000, 2,500, let's do 6,000, 3,000, let's do 10,500. To Mr. Garvey's point, that's just not going to go anywhere. We know that. We know Mr. Hartley's, you know, sitting here as well, and we know what sort of is out there. And I agree. I mean, Mr. Garvey made a lot of great points there about what we're talking about. So if we do it all in teachers and we don't give systems a chance to operate, then what we're going to do is we're going to lower what happens with teachers. I've got to go from 22 to 1 to 28 to 1, or I've got to push to 33 to 1 because you're forcing me to pay teachers. And the only way I can get money to operate now is to pull back on the number of teachers that I have there. So I have more of the discretionary money that comes from the MFP to take care of the insurance, to take care of other things. You know, at the end of the day, there's really not a lot of discretionary money in a school district's budget anyway. And so I I agree with Ms. Posey. I mean, whatever we can swing for teachers, I want to swing for. But I am as strong as you all, but as strong as your feelings are about the amount for teachers. I think 2.75% for districts to be able to operate and continue to have that opportunity to do what they need to do on an individual basis, fix things that haven't been fixed in years, and these kind of things, is very necessary. So I'm with you.
I know you gave raises this year separate in the department.
And we've been able to do one-times, and then we've been able to offer the incentive pay as well. Our West Side schools make $10,000 more than our East Side schools. So, because we needed to elevate the certified staffing over there.
Look, we've been doing retention pay just to get them back.
Yeah.
And if they leave, they pay it back.
Can I just make a clarification? You know, looking at the numbers across the state, it may sound good to do a 50% of an increase, but think about all the school systems that are losing kids right now. That math is not going to come out like you anticipate, you know, because so many people are losing students. There are very few. There's some that always grow, and 50% of an increase may not materialize amongst a lot of systems because they're losing kids. So when you tie that increase that you think you're going to get in 2.75%, when in fact you're going to get a decrease somewhat because it might be a few dollars. And so you won't make any headway mathematically, you know, to contribute to a greater pay raise. Looking at those statistics from those, you know, years we did that, it's just not what you think it's going to be in the end when the data actually goes in to the math.
But those losing are going to continue to lose. And that's the thing. If you don't give them something, it's just going to get worse.
Well, I'm not saying, if you give them a 2.75% with no conditions, that is different than telling them, I'm giving you this dollar, but I'm taking back a percentage. Because that little difference is not going to mean nothing to them, is what's going to end up happening, because we're splitting that amount in such a fraction. Because everything else comes into play. If their tax revenues are down, they might get a little wealthier, they might get a few dollars there, but a lot of people I'm seeing in the latest tax data have got some huge sales tax increases, which is going to influence, and if it raises all the boats, that's different. But if you've got some that have huge sales tax increases, they could possibly lose a little money, particularly if they lose kids. So I want y'all to see the world as it looks in the paper, you know, on the calculations of that, trying to segregate out 50% of an increase is not going to generate what y'all think it might increase, just from historic and, like I said, looking at the numbers. That pay raise in level 4 is very transparent, it's very specific, as well as a 2.75% in level 1 with no restrictions would be a block grant as it was intended to do. Just something to think about.
Ms. Holloway, what's on the table right now?
Sorry. I'm sorry. Would you like clarification?
Yes.
Repeat.
I believe who was the, now I'm lost in who made the, we don't even have another motion yet.
You were the
Well, other than Dr.
Bowman
Bowman.
added, and I was coming back with the supplementary.
So are we going to have another substitute?
Mine was the 2,000, 1,000, and 2.75.
It was Cynthia.
Wipe out everything else, and then it went that way.
We went back to Kay's motion.
That's
and
what
then
they
add
were
the seat.
But he was going to add. So are you doing that?
Is that a substitute?
I like to supplement the 2,000, 1,000 in level 4, and 2.75 in level 1, and wipe out the rest.
Wipe out number 2.
And 3.
And no contingencies?
Contingencies.
No, that's what I did.
What?
Yeah, the contingencies that we talked about.
Yeah.
The REC comes back with a.
Yeah, I can do the wording, I just need to know if you want to do that.
Well, I mean, if we get more money, yes, but we're not guaranteed that money, we don't know.
You're asking. You're asking.
That's the
It doesn't
minimum
hurt
of
to
2,000,
ask,
1,000, and add anything you get to.
Wait, are we putting it in the motion?
Yes.
So it can be added in the motion.
It can be, I just need to know if you want it in there.
Okay.
You want it in there,
Yes.
so the wording is going to be, 2.75% increase to the statewide base per pupil. The increase includes a provision that requires schools and school districts where the average annual teacher salary is below the Southern Regional Education Board average to dedicate half of the increase to teacher pay raises. And I'm not sure of the wording on the support staff. You said something about 2 to 1, but I don't know how to word it.
Definitely know how to word it.
Oh, God, don't we?
Do you know how to word the support staff increase? I've got the SREB part.
Would it be
Yeah, we've never done
1.37?
that. I would have to go check and see what, if that's really had some staff, statistics like that. I've never done her support.
To take 1.375 of the increase
Was that
and
half?
provide salary increases to all staff but on a 2-to-1 ratio between teachers and support staff.
Is that right?
So, I heard REC, I'm sorry.
Not REC, SREB.
Oh, okay.
I have the language for that.
I'll leave that.
And I'll come up with something, and as well as the support staff. So we'll put that in there. I just
There is
have
a
to figure out-
possibility outside another 1,000.
2,000, 1,000.
Okay, so number 1 is 2,000 and 1,000, and number 2 recommendation is?
275 with half towards teacher and sports staff raises if they're not at the average. And that's it. Right? Okay.
Sounds good.
I second.
Okay. All right, Aaron.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander votes yes. Dr. Bromley. Dr. Bromley abstains. Mr. Castillo votes proxy. Mr. Claxton.
Yes.
Mr. Claxton votes yes. Ms. Conaway? No. Ms. Conaway votes no. Dr. Corbill has a proxy. Mr. Davis?
No.
Mr. Davis votes no. Mr. Irwin? Ms. Grimm?
Yes.
Ms. Grimm votes yes. Mr. Hartley? Mr. Hartley abstains. Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Fleur votes yes. Dr. Mills?
Yes.
Dr. Mills votes yes. Ms. Polito has a proxy. Dr. Pope?
Yes.
Dr. Pope votes yes. Ms. Posey?
Yes.
Ms. Posey votes yes. Dr. Procopio?
Yes.
Dr. Procopio votes yes. Ms. Romer?
We did it for you.
Yes.
What are you unhappy with?
Yes.
Ms. Romer votes yes. Ms. Bochet?
Yes.
Ms. Bochet votes yes.
Motion carries.
Next item, please.
That concludes your agenda.
Motion?
Motion to